Welcome to Practicing Life Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Pitzer. Today's episode, I am reading you chapter 1 or maybe a bit of it. We'll see how long this goes because I like to keep these around 30 minutes. But I'm going to be reading you chapter 1 from my new release that is just come out December 11th, and I will have a book signing this Saturday, as in tomorrow. So this is the Marked Heart. It is a teen fantasy. There's lots of like esoteric philosophy in there. If you like chakras, if you like knowing characters, deep characters, if you like soap opera kind of stuff where you're just like swept into everybody's drama, this book is for you. So it is teen. I say 16 plus. And, I do write that there is trigger warnings in case anybody's aware, but I say this because I'm a coach. And everyone is going to have different tolerance levels and maturity levels, but just know that this book does contain sexual assault and sexual content. So it may not be to a discomfort level for you, but trigger warnings are meant for people who have, PTS and anxiety around certain things. And also this is geared towards young adults, so 16 plus. So this may not bother you at all. I can't say. I just put it in here to let you know that this does exist. And if you are super sensitive to it, then you can be forewarned and make a decision what is best for you. So without further ado, I will start reading. But I guess I should make a side note that I am not a professional narrator. I am an author. And as you know, I do these podcasts. I do them and I include the flaws in there. So it's just me, my authentic self, stumbling over words, whatever it may be. I will do the best that I can, and to know that I didn't practice this either. So here we go. Chapter 1, The Dust Settles. Flan squeezed his shoulder blades together, and his spine popped. His tongue swept over his teeth as he considered his response. This woman was sadly mistaken if she thought she could put him in his place. Flan approached her slowly and with confidence. His voice was low and threatening. She is not your concern anymore. Marigold spat in rage. How can you call yourself a bodyguard? She looked down before letting out an angry laugh. First day on the job and you've already failed to keep her in your command. She walked to where Fawn sat and dragged her fingertips along the arms of the chair. Flan's eyes flickered to Fawn. He noticed the anxiety and fear radiating off of her. I was right. I told Brom he should have chosen Bard over you. Stiffening at the jab to his character, Flan poked back. Like it was in your power to choose. Brom calls the shots. Either way, we both have our roles. Mine is a bodyguard, and yours is over. She walked up to him. We'll see about that. Flan saw Marigold's eyes cast to the door. A victorious smile flashed on her face as she lightly pushed him to the side. Flan turned to see Roots entering the gathering room with her head bowed and her body crumbled. At first, his heart enlarged in his chest at the sight of her, but it fell just as quickly. Whoever this was before him was not the woman he desired. Roots' posture reminded him of a hurt child, like a young, submissive girl not aware of her power. He ground his teeth as his slave days surfaced. He remembered feeling and acting insignificant. He hated to see Roots shrink into herself. He hated Marigold's attitude even more. He stepped between them, ready to act as the bodyguard and shield Roots. But he could do nothing to protect her from her inner demons. Seeing the door to the hut open, Roots had slowed her run. Cautiously approaching, she first heard and then saw Flan and her mother. Roots was stunned at how Flan disrespected Marigold's maternal role. Her eyebrows pinched together in confusion. She didn't understand what was going on. It was as if Flan and her mother knew each other, but they had only been introduced 3 days ago. She saw the anger on her mother's face and bit her lip. Flan's back was to her, but the stiffness in his shoulders communicated to Roots that he was on edge. Roots assumed her mother had provoked Flan, a skill she had perfected. Watching her mother attack, not only in words, but in her stance, and the energy emanating from her, cowered Roots, despite her anger not being directed at her. How can Flan stand there, unaffected by her simmering rage with calmness, with ease? Her stomach rolled. She took small steps into the hut, just as the two of her life force partners, Keen and Bard, arrived. Mother, Roots asked, bringing her fingers together submissively and looking down. It was best to avoid eye contact. Roots kept her face downcast, waiting for her mother to explode, and after a few seconds of silence, she looked up. As soon as she did, Marigold's hand flew hard and unforgiving against Roots' cheek. The slap was filled with a hint of some strange magic that caused Marigold's trim, polished nails to split open 4 slashes across Roots' left cheek. Spit flew out of Roots' mouth as her head whipped from the force of the slap. 3 things happened at once. Starting with Flan grabbing Marigold's forearm. The white, sheer fabric pulled tight at her shoulders as he caught her extended arm in mid-motion from the swing. Marigold's lips pulled back, showing her teeth as a statement of contempt. Roots noticed Flan's squeezed Marigold's arm tighter, as if he judged her as someone who would do what she wanted to do and take what she wanted to take. The veins along his temples enlarged, and Roots could see Flan fighting the temptation to shatter her bones. The second thing that happened was Marigold's belittling comment, which somehow hung in the air. And you thought you were something important now. Roots hadn't seen Marigold's mouth move, and the questioning look on Flan's face told Roots he hadn't either. It was as if Marigold's thoughts manifested into an audible sound. The third thing that happened was Bard and Keen came to Roots' back within seconds, crowding the space. Wolverine was there too. He hung back, observing, as if overseeing it all. He was the eyes and ears of the Ori now, and their designated warrior to do their bidding. All 4 men were enraged. Roots dropped her chin to her chest and thought quickly. Was she going to let them fight her battles, or was she going to do something about it? Marigold's eyes glistened with rage despite facing men who were ready to put her into the ground and have no regret about it. She stood her ground as if it didn't occur to her that this was a fight she couldn't win. Back off. This is between Sabina and me. She has to answer for what she has done. This is her fault. Roots felt Marigold's hard stare, even with her dropped head. With quiet intensity, Marigold spoke at Roots while Flan held onto her arm. Roots sensed Flan's readiness to pounce and her mother's enjoyment of the power she felt when she spoke. This is all your fault. Mother! Out of the corner of her eye, Roots saw Flan hugging the couch pillow to her chest. She remained seated with her knees pressed against one another and her toes turned in. Her eyes were huge as she took in the men who towered over her mother. Shaking with anger, Flan spoke through gritted teeth. I will not allow you to treat Roots. She had had enough. She wasn't going to allow herself to be a coward while everyone came to her defense. She was powerful now. She had Muins. She had people who cared about her by her side. Her mother had no control over her anymore. She was an adult and free to live her life. She wasn't going to be like her sister and continue to live her life to please her mother. Besides, her days were numbered. Too long. It was now or never. Flan! She was so worked up by her self-talk that she barked out his name like an order. Flan kept his body firm like a statue, but moved his eyes to her. He began to feel the energetic line between them hum, and warmth spread through his body. His body immediately relaxed. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he missed the connection between them. He longed for it, and a part of him sighed with pleasure. He briefly closed his eyes, savoring the tingling energy cracking between them. Warm apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream popped into his mind, his favorite dessert. There was something delicious about Root's feisty energy, something that thrilled him while simultaneously demanding his respect. He hid the smile twitching on his lips. This was not the time or the place to be playful, but he delighted in seeing the annoyance on Root's face. This was the woman he had fallen for in such a way that his whole life altered. Goosebumps ran down his skin, and tenderness swelled in his heart. Roots had lifted her head in slow motion. Blood trickled out of the deep slashes across her face. Her eyes glowed ever so slightly as her movements built and vibrated through her. Her entire focus was on her mother, but she spoke to Flan. "Let me handle her." He immediately let go of Marigold's arm and put his hand behind his back, signaling to Roots that he would not interfere. Keen and Bard followed suit and took a step back. Marigold looked astounded. "You will handle me?" she smirked. "You are a child, so naive." "What is my fault?" Root asked, not entertaining her mother. Her voice was flat and emotionless. Her stone-cold face was just as dead as her voice. If it wasn't for her vibrating eyes and blood dripping down her face, one might have thought she resembled a vampire. "Don't pretend with me." "Never mind. That question doesn't matter. Because I am no longer available for you to beat upon or blame. Whatever you think is my fault has nothing to do with me." Marigold's shadow on the wall grew larger as she shook her head in incrementally small movements to indicate no. She bared her teeth as she spoke. "Oh, so high and mighty now. You think you are so important because you are the Agni?" Roots cut Marigold off and argued. "No, the Agni is how the world may choose to see me, but that is not who I am. I may have been born with certain talents, but my talents don't make me special. It is me who makes me matter. You are nobody. You are nothing special." Marigold shook with emotions. Roots rejected her mother's words. "To you, maybe, but not to me. My opinion is the only one that counts. Your opinion is nothing more than a distraction from seeing who I really am. I've lived my whole life to please you and Father, and I've seen where that's gotten me. It's time for me to do something different. So I've decided that you hold no power over me." Flan felt like fireworks were going off in his chest. He was so happy, but he remained stoic on the outside. "You ungrateful pigeon," Marigold spat. "You decided? Who gave you the authority to decide?" "Who gave you your authority?" Roots tossed back. "The Ori," Marigold said, as if Roots was stupid. "Well, I'm an adult now, and I decide for myself." "Fine. You don't want my help. I won't give it. I hope you enjoy living in Sector 1 and walking the mile into town for everything. I really don't care anymore. What I do care about is Brom." Blinking a few times, Roots felt off-balanced. Had she won her first argument with Marigold? It was difficult to tell. She might be shocked, or maybe it was the pain confusing her. It felt like red ants had invaded the side of her face. The burning sensation in her cheek was getting worse at each passing second. Half dazed, she mumbled, Brom was taken. I know, and you better bring him back to me. Marigold leaned forward as if she was going to disclose private information. She expected her to whisper. Instead, she spoke low and rough, like she was fighting a storm of emotions. I have guarded your secrets my whole life, and if you don't bring Brom back to me, I am going to make your life a living Hades. Roots crossed her arms and let Marigold's threat bounce off as meaningless. She was tired, too tired, and in too much pain for niceties. Oh, what? All 15 days of it? You think Dross will show you the kindness of death after what you have done to him? Slightly louder, she said. There are all sorts of things he can do to you that will make your life miserable for the rest of your days. Quieting, Marigold added, no matter how many days are left. Ruth's mouth dropped open, her cheek forgotten. She was speechless. Her mind tried to search for worst-case scenarios, yet it couldn't. She was too stunned. She hadn't considered anything but the loom of death. The realization that her fate could be far worse than death was more than she could handle. Her system was overloaded. She hadn't had time to process all the information coming at her, and she lacked the ability to decipher this new threat. What would Dross do to me besides curse me? And what had I done to him? She felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. Despite not wanting to believe Marigold's words, they still hit her as the truth. Her newfound strength fled. The belief she was special was replaced by fear. Several small waves of unease crept into her soul Her newfound strength fled. The belief she was special was replaced by fear. Several small waves of unease crept into her soul as if she had swallowed several doses of an anxiety potion. Her stomach felt heavy as her mind recalled past rumors of what Dross had done to others. Her reality solidified. The likelihood of her surviving against such enormous odds was hopeless. Who was she but a 16-year-old girl who had been sheltered her whole life? She wasn't ready for her life to be over, and she certainly wasn't prepared to be tortured for eternity. Why did I want these gifts? Sure, I was a nobody before, but I was safe. But because of these new ones, I am noticeable. And because I am noticeable, I am hunted. I have no idea how to protect myself from the dark arts. Worry spread across the connection between Roots and Flan. Flan's arm twitched with the desire to reach out and comfort her. He wanted nothing more than to wrap his arms around her and tell her they would find a way out of this, even if that was a lie. He was unsure what to do. He didn't have the answers, and that hurt him. His energy drained out of him at the hopelessness he felt. It was perhaps the first time his fear for something had caused him to have a visceral reaction. He hated admitting it, but he wished he could ask Brom for advice. No one knew Dross better than Brom. He used his new winds to reach out to Brom again. Silence. Rushing forward from the couch and then stopping herself, Ruth's sister brushed the wrinkles out of her handmade designer slacks. Mother doesn't know. Mother doesn't mean that. She's upset. The council has called us to a meeting tomorrow morning before the funerals and the completion of your birth challenge. Fawn looked back at the couch where the dress she made for Roots rested. I brought it back for you. Roots didn't respond, but her mother did. Marigold seemed determined to make sure Roots understood what she had done. Marigold sounded out of breath as she talked, like she was holding back tears. That wasn't possible. Marigold didn't cry. None of this would have happened if you had done what you were supposed to do. But you had to know what it felt like to be noticed, to pretend to be something. Foolish girl. You couldn't be happy with a simple life, could you? Now, Fawn and I may be exiled from Silverdown, and it's all your fault. Cocking her head, Roots struggled to make sense of what her mother was telling her. Why would she be exiled because of my birth challenge? How are these two things related? Why didn't I stay hidden? Maybe then I'd still have my father. Shame drenched her in sweat as she considered. I am a murderer. My mother, my father, the war. Roots felt small, and a cold chill ran down her spine. She deserved Dross's curse for the havoc she caused. She crumbled into herself and longed for everyone to go away. She couldn't think straight and lacked the strength to keep standing. She couldn't even tell if she was freezing or overheated. Her emotions were high, and her world seemed to be spinning out of control. Her mental walls caved in on her, and she felt so alone. Her eyes locked on Flan's. He stood attentively with his beautiful green eyes focused on her and concern across his face. He was right beside her, but the distance between them felt like a canyon. He was another paradox. Everything about being with him was wrong. He was broody and sarcastic. He disliked her father, and he was shorter than her. Plus, he was already committed to someone else. Her thoughts drifted to their kiss. His body jerked as if it repulsed him. Yet, as she focused on him, her world stopped spinning. He grounded her like an anchor on a boat. The connection they shared broke through the ice in her chest and made room for her heart to beat rapidly and vigorously. The heaviness of her soul lightened as she continued to stare at him. Then the pull she felt towards him was undeniable. They could have been the only two in the room at that moment. Her gaze moved to his lips, and she thought of them caressing her neck. Her heart pounded wildly. He was the distraction she needed to help her forget about her father, Dross, and her mounting problems. The spark of energy between them lit her up. She imagined what it would feel like to be in his arms as he passionately kissed her. She wanted to feel the softness of his lips move along her skin. She desired to crush her body against him and eliminate all distance. She needed him. Heat spread across her body. She noticed Flan clench his jaw and clear his throat. He shifted his stance. A surge of power rocked her body in response. It was a good thing they weren't alone. She was sure she would have attacked him, or at the very least, thrown herself at him. Realizing she had zoned out, Roots turned to reality and looked around. The pain in her heart and cheek bloomed back into existence. She struggled to pay attention. Her mother seemed to be lost in her thoughts, too. Fawn was anxiously explaining her mother's behavior. Roots blinked a few times, noticing her healer and seer life partners, Vigo and Tevin, for the first time. Her best friend Crystal was there, too, and Fabia. Sky above. She blushed realizing Fabia was reading her emotions and knew what she had been thinking. Fabia wasn't hiding her knowing smile either. To her. She loves this. She loves my discomfort too. Crystal probably saw what she was thinking with her seer Muin. She was a foolish girl. Fabia gave a slight nod, as if she agreed with Ruth's thoughts. Ruth wanted to hide under the blankets like she was when she did. Ruth wanted to hide under the blankets like she did when she was a child. Instead, she looked at the drapes to her room. She was inches away from escaping everyone, but they would only follow her. Wolverine stepped forward. May I offer a different perspective? That snapped Marigold back into the conversation. Oh, yes, the Ori's new favorite person stepping in to take Brom's place. Maybe, he placated, but consider this. It has not been determined if you will be exiled from Silverdome. If you are, then it is within your power to find Brom, as I am sure you are just as capable as you believe Roots to be. And if you are to remain in Silverdome, then you will have to relinquish your authority over Roots. She's an adult and no longer answerable to you. I suggest you take up your grievances with the Ori. Dare you? The point is, no one knows what will happen to you, Brom, or Roots. How about you return to the hospital before you do something that will force the Ori's hand to exile you? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a green marker as a silent threat. Roots looked at the marker. Like all Silverdomies, Roots knew that the marker were attached to the skin of someone summoned to meet the Ori. Once the marker was activated, Marigold would have 1 hour before she must be before the council. Waiting was not advised, as the marker gave increasingly more painful reminders as time passed. Wolverine spoke sternly, and with an air that seemed older than he was. Everyone who knew him looked at him with disbelief. Root's thoughts flashed back to the strange behavior he exhibited before the ceremony. She wondered if war could change someone so drastically. She glanced at Crystal, who was looking at Wolverine, as if she had never seen him before either. Fine, I'm going. Marigold walked up to Bard, who was standing directly behind Roots. She whispered so low that all the protectors in the room strained to be able to distinguish her words. Our kind needs to stick together. In her normal voice, she warned Roots. If you need an example of what Dross can do to you, look at Keen. Then she left. Wolverine followed her out the door, phrasing a command as a request. Let me walk you to the hospital. Roots heard someone say, let's give Roots some space. Everyone looked around as if they knew they should give her privacy, but no one left. Roots stood in the same spot with her shoulders hitched. She remained guarded by her life partners, though they shuffled about her. Prince Zol joined them in the tut. He looked like he was untouched by the conflict until he came closer. He made a face at her. Roots looked about and saw everyone had the same downcast mood as Prince, except Fabia. She seemed unfazed. A red, angry ribbon of energy floated out of Keen and pressed against her back. It wrapped around her neck like a possessive scarf. Her irritation grew. Flan noticed a shift in Root's energy. An image of Keen and Roots staring at each other across the fire came to his mind. His heart was pierced once more. He had forgotten about the obstacles between them during the conflict with Marigold, but he hadn't been spared for long. The recalled memory reminded him of where he stood in Root's life. Flan sensed Keen's energy vibrate along the connection between them. Earlier, he had instinctually known that there was something between Roots and Keen. Now, it had been confirmed. He felt the effect of Keen's influence on the woman he desired. This was proof his energetic link to Roots wasn't unique. Keen impacted Roots just as much as he did. Flan was disappointed in this revelation, and he felt rejected. His energy and shoulders fell, even as another thought nagged at him. There was a craving to Keen's energy, as if he wanted to take, not give. What he had with Roots was the opposite. But was that enough? He sighed. He wished he couldn't feel what was happening between Roots and Keen. It lessened what he had with Roots. But once something was known, it could never be unknown. And while Flan stewed on how Keen was a contender for Roots' heart, she turned to face him. Leave, she demanded. A spark of energy hit Flan in the gut. He pushed the hope away. Still, he wasn't sorry Roots had asked Keen to leave. He was only confused by it. He wanted to believe it meant Roots and Keen's connection was different. But he dismissed that thought too. It was more likely that Roots was irritated by the pain she felt in her cheek. Roots suffered more than she let on, and Flan's cheek throbbed in sympathetic pains. It was nearly unbearable. He stopped himself from putting his hand on his face several times. He would never give an opponent any signs of weakness. It was a warrior's motto, and he was schooled enough to not show distress outwardly. Flan watched Keen stiffen at Root's words. He didn't say anything. He ground his teeth and he looked down at Roots with a cold stare. She held her defiance visible for all to see, but Flan sensed how emotionally stretched she was. Keen put a long grass blade from his back pocket into his mouth. Then he walked away into the dark, shirtless. His anger followed him like a cape. Not that Flan was able to see, but he perceived it through Roots. Vigo immediately stepped in to heal Roots' cheek. He called for Fabia to get something out of his bag, and he called Fabia to get something out of his bag as he held his hand to her gashes. A soft yellow light spilled out as he turned to talk to his sister. Flan saw Roots look at Vigo with trust and confidence when he did. It made him long to be in Vigo's place and to be the one with the hand on her face. Sky above. Did he forget he was in competition for her affection? Where were his walls to protect himself? Flan gazed at Roots, but she seemed to intentionally avoid looking at him. He felt stupid. He didn't want to feel this need to be near her or touch her. He wasn't supposed to be vulnerable. He was her bodyguard, not her boyfriend. He allowed his anger at himself to build. Anger would save him from doing something he might regret, and it gave him the strength to walk away from Roots. He needed time to think through his feelings for her and to reflect on the discussion he had with Nora, his now ex-girlfriend. Besides, he wanted to get away from the others before he passed out from the burning sensation in his cheek, which he assumed came through his connection with Roots. Flan headed up the stairs to his room without a word to anyone. Once Flan had his back to her, Roots finally allowed herself to look at him. She stared at his back until he was out of sight, while Vigo tenderly held her cheek. Then she looked at Vigo and thought about how odd it was that she had embraced him naked and felt nothing. yet Flan's intense green eyes set her insides burning with need. Vigo's touch meant nothing, and Flan's touch meant everything. Anxiety constricted her heart as she thought of Fabia's words before her birth challenge. Is this what love is? Something that consumes me and makes me lose focus when I have so much to face? And Vigo let go of Root's cheek and shook out his hand. He spoke under his breath. Roots thought he said, "Mind your thoughts, please." But she was so lost in her mind, she could have imagined it. She moved her focus to the others. The room was filled with stimulation as people lingered. Was everyone calling her name at once? Or were they only talking about her? It seemed like everyone wanted something from her. Her attention, her time, her guilt, her sacrifice. It was as if she was pulled in multiple directions, though she stood still as Vigo worked on her, healing the wounds her mother had inflicted. Roots was beaten down and overwhelmed. She wanted to sleep, not entertain. Her thoughts went back to Flan. He somehow managed to take her mind away from all this madness. Before he walked away, she had felt his despair so intensely that she had mistaken it for her own. His misery felt like an invitation to her wounded heart. She didn't understand the cause of his heartache, and she thought it would dissipate with his absence. Instead, the weight of his emotions lingered like everyone in the room. Caleb. She wished those green eyes were focused on her, but how could she ask so much from him? It wasn't fair to want his attention when he had someone else in his life. She needed to choose another. In hindsight, it had been ridiculous for her to assume that Flan had wanted to give his love to her because she saw him stumbling through the forest to escape whatever he had witnessed between her and Keen. She huffed at her foolishness for hoping he would withdraw his declaration to marry Nora. For her. There was no denying a part of her desired that outcome, but another part of her demanded to stop thinking about an unavailable boy. Besides, it was selfish of her to ask him to love her when her life was in jeopardy. All she could offer him were mere days together before Dross came for her. She was a dead end, whereas Nora was someone he could spend his life with. If she loved him, she would want that for him. She would wish him happiness. Instead, she was fixated on how her body hungered for him, and that urge didn't care about logic. But she did not love him, no matter what Fabia had said to her. She wouldn't argue that she felt something more profound than the energetic connection between them, but she didn't love him. And even if she did love him, she wouldn't. It was better not to know love than to love and lose it. Roots inwardly deflated as she talked herself out of seeking Flan's attention. She wasn't going to make his life more complicated by binding him to her. How could she ask Flan or any of her life partners to tie, knowing that whoever she would choose would suffer significantly if she was to pass on? She wanted to live, but at what cost? She didn't see how tying with anyone would save her from Dross anyway. No one lived after Dross got a hold of them. No one. So, why would her father put her in the position to inflict suffering on another needlessly? There had to be something he knew that she didn't. She was 16 and an adult now. By law, she had the right to ask for a tying. But She was not interested in binding herself to another. She wanted to experience life, not be tied down or limited. No matter how much she loved the books of old that talked about soulmates, tying wasn't hypothetical like a love story. It was a spiritual ritual to link two people together lifetime after lifetime. Tying created a permanent bond that made two people inseparable because their energy would always seek each other. Hardly anyone chose such a commitment, though those that did were among the happiest couples. But to Roots, tying felt like confinement. The bannering in the room came to Roots' awareness, bringing with it the reminder that her days were numbered. There were only so many conversations she had left before she would be dead, cursed, or worse, and everyone else would move on. She wanted to place her hands on her head and scream. She wished she could tell everyone to go away and to leave her alone, as Flan had done. Was he the only one that understood her? Or was it that they both valued being alone? If so, that was one more thing they had in common. Everyone's eyes seemed to be on her, especially her life force partners. What did they want from her? As if she was a mind reader, she scanned the room. She could practically feel the radiance of Tevin's smile, like he could win her over with his charms. She decided he wanted a partner. The prince was standing too close and breathing on her neck. His accidental bumps brought the back of her arm in contact with his crotch, like his gift of persuasion needed the reinforcement of physical contact. He wanted sex, she thought. Pond sat on the couch with his arms crossed, watching and waiting as if he was biding his time. He was supposed to be a family friend. She had liked him until she discovered he had shielded her to make her invisible to the world. Despite being sought after by many single adults in the village, she had learned she was the only person Pond had agreed to have a union interview with. But why her, and not someone like Fawn? Was the Agni the only partner good enough for him to be with? Or did he seek to control her? Bard rocked on his heels as he talked to Tevin, but he glanced repeatedly at her. She hadn't figured out his agenda. What would a gay shapeshifter want from her? An illusion to hide his identity? Safety. Well, they had that in common then. The only life partner left in the room was Vigo, and he was diligently working on her cheek, getting flustered that his healing wasn't working. She liked how she could have been anyone to him. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing his work. She wondered if he wanted a place where he could be left alone. Or maybe he had already gotten what he needed from her. Freedom from his servitude to the prince. Her eyes moved to Fabia, who was helping Vigo and uncharacteristically looking at Roots with concern. Even Crystal watched her like a stealth cat as she leaned against the wall. She bit down on her lower lip, feeling like she was on display for all in the room except Vigo and her sister. All right, I'm going to end there. That's almost the end of, I'm not quite to the climax of the cliffhanger for chapter 1, but you get it. So this is a good sample, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please reach out to me and let me know what questions you have. And of course, this book is available to purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so many other places. And I always recommend that you request your library to pick up this book and allow other people to read it for free. So much love to you guys. Have a really great holiday. I will have 2 repeats of some popular episodes for you, and then I will be back in the new year with the next new episode. All right, you guys, you matter.